as with anything, we learn the most by failing or by not performing at the top of our ability. And, growing up, again, part of this amazing upbringing that I had was I was given the opportunity to not succeed as often as I was given the opportunity to succeed. And the lesson there was showing up as your authentic self and, being honest, being transparent, all of those things always yielded a better result than trying to be somebody that you're not, or trying to spin a tale to cover a mistake. All of those things ultimately don't lead you to the best possible result. So showing up and being able to say, this is what I do well, and this is what I really don't. And I recognize that, and I want to lean on the people who are good at that. I want to learn from them. If I do it wrong, tell me, right? All of those things kind of lead you to a place where you're comfortable in your skin, because you don't always have to be perfect. You just have to be you.
So much of our conversation today is going to revolve around authenticity and connection. What were some of those maybe early experiences with connection that made you say, hey, this is something that I'm really interested in to chase a career down?
So when I joined the company that I joined, courtesy of the woman that I tracked to New York, I was given the opportunity to talk to I was basically handling a large group of professionals. And I was going and speaking and flying around the country, but on the phone all day and doing teleconferences with large groups of people. And I just hearing everybody's stories and learning about their lives in that context, just always, I couldn't get enough. I just wanted to learn, and less about talking, more about listening and taking it all in and appreciating each person for the experiences and that sort of tapestry of who they are that they bring to the table. That's just, I have such an appetite for that. And I've kind of always had it. And I ride horses, and there's a lot of connection and communication that's unspoken in that sport. And so being able to sit and try to understand somebody without having to interject all the time, or not even having to speak, just watch them, watch how they interact, watch how they, their facial expressions, all those things really led me to have this really natural curiosity about people and humans and how they show up in the world.
Man, I feel like at one point in time, I'm not sure when it happened, but it happened to the majority of us. We were taught that we have to be a different version of ourselves in order to get the acclaim and the validation that so many of us look for. And then when we become an adult, right? Me, it was in my early 30s, around 34 now, I started recognizing that I can actually be successful for being exactly who I am. And people naturally pick up on the intuition of like, oh, that person isn't faking who they're trying to be. And I feel like we need so much more of that. When do you think we were kind of duped, if you will, Jen? If we didn't have amazing parents like you that encouraged us to be our authentic selves, when do you think that process happens, and why so many of us fall into this rut?
I think it happens sort of insidious, right? It happens over time throughout our lives. And it's by comparing ourselves to other people, whether it's to our friends, whether it's to people on television, whether it's to whomever. And now it's really in our face by way of social media, right? There's all these examples of how a relationship's supposed to look. What is your home supposed to look like? What is all this supposed to be? And very little of it is real. And when you finally find that person who just rings true, and so often I find anyway, it's linked to a sense of humor and the ability to be a little self-deprecating and all those things, that just the connection that you feel with those people who just seem real. There's just no facade there at all. That's, so it's sort of insidious throughout our life, where we meet these people periodically. We're shown sort of, this is what success looks like. This is what the ideal relationship, beaver cleaver, like all of those things have sort of been bled into our psyches over our lifetime. And to be able to to step back and say, wait, that actually wasn't real at all. That's not even an appropriate goal to have, because it's just not authentic at all.
You touched on needing curiosity in this process. So much of what you do is really having to sit down, really get to know someone, really understand where they're coming from, their background, where they've been. How do you feel like you've used that element of curiosity and taken it into the world of matchmaking?
So it goes both ways, right? We have to be curious about who this individual is, and without any judgment, right? There has to be a safe space for people to talk about who they are, what they want, what they've done, what they want to do, without any fear of somebody sort of qualifying or making some sort of assessment about it. And the only way that we can do that is to have that genuine level of interest and to truly be curious about somebody. And when you do that, people will tell you things that you never expect, right? The most accomplished CEO that you can think of will tell you sort of the deepest, darkest vulnerabilities. And that's what you build on. You build them up from there, right? And so being able to ask the questions, giving people a safe space to talk about the things that they love, their goals, the things that scare them, because we all have them. And in exchange, when we're working with somebody, that level of curiosity about the people that we're presenting to them, understand, if you can make people understand that they're not just what the world sees, there's so much more, and to give other people that same benefit of the doubt, to say, oh, here's a photo and here's a bio, but we're going to tell them about who this person is, not what they look like, not what they do, not where they live. We're going to tell you who they are. And that's so maintaining a level of curiosity and even playfulness around meeting people and learning about other people.
The analogy of like an iceberg popped into my head, right? And from the fact of like you've engaged with so many different types of people, right, in different roles who are all looking for that connection that is so special, how would you kind of consider the equation of like the iceberg that we normally see of everybody? Do we normally show the 15% of our lives, but 85% of it is beneath the surface? Or what does that equation look like based on your experience in talking to so many people?
And one of the real privileges of this job is that we sort of reverse that. We get to see about 85%. And some people let the water drop slowly, so to speak. And some people really come to us and here I am. But the people who only show 15% are doing themselves a disservice, because that 85% is so critical for us to understand. It doesn't mean we have to disclose it, but we have to understand it. We have to know about it. Because we can't provide that holistic vetting process, right? We can't go deep on those things that they're hiding because we don't know about them.
When I think about matchmaking, a bit tongue in cheek, but I think about the movie Hitch with Will Smith, which is, really funny. I'm curious, what does modern matchmaking really look like? If someone's trying to wrap their head around what it looks like in, 2025 and is really interested in finding a partner who they can relate to and spend their time with, what does that look like today?
So I can make it a little bit unromantic. Sorry, but
Okay.
there's two analogies that I would use for, because a lot of people that we work with are business minded, right? And they're trying to understand, this all feels so soft and smushy, I can't really wrap my head around it. Right. So the first analogy would be that of an executive recruiting model, where if you're going to go hire a very important person in your company, you're not just going to whip over and open LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever and just rifle through thousands of resumes. Yeah. You want somebody who's sort of your intermediary there to say, okay, these are the ones that you should look at, and here's why, right? The other analogy I would make, and we talked about this before, Keenan, is we're a trusted advisor in the same way that anybody else is a trusted advisor, whether it's, legal advisor or financial advisor. This is an incredibly important aspect of somebody's life, and it impacts and influences virtually everything else. So why wouldn't you lean into a group that's been doing this for 40 years successfully, who can be your advocate, be your intermediary, and really help you not only to show up in the process, but to absorb what's to be gained and learned through the process as well. So those are really the two ways that I do suggest that people look at this when they have a hard time wrapping their head around, wait, I'm going to go hire somebody to find me somebody. That so there's some disconnect there, but it's really the same thing that you would do if you were hiring a senior person, or if you're looking for advice in another aspect of your life that you wanted to make sure you got right.
I mean, at the end of the day, if we're talking about the most important relationship that you can truly have based on your success, if we look at this through the lens of business, right? Often you'll hear people who are hyper successful say the most important relationship you have is with your partner. If they are not going to be somebody who's going to stand behind you, support you, and push you to be the best version of yourself, you're selling yourself short.
Yeah.
So here's one of the things that I want to get your opinion on, Jen. So in 2022, the Surgeon General came onto a national broadcast, first time since the 60s, where he was talking about the dangers of cigarette smoke, and said, we are dealing with a national challenge, which is not another viral pandemic, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. With all of the advent of social media and all these swiping left, swiping right on dating apps and stuff like that, it seems like we've lost the ability to dive deep into these relationships, leaving more people feeling lonely. What's kind of your 2 cents on the loneliness epidemic that's happening? And do you think technology is really playing a key role in kind of pushing us further apart with the illusion of connection?
I think you just said it, the illusion of connection. That's what it is, because it's transactional in so many ways, right? If you think about online dating, it's gamified. It's a transaction. There's no obligation to show up at all, frankly, let alone as your authentic self. So it's allowed people to interact a lot, but on a very surface level, right? Without any sense of accountability to that. So when that happened, it was on the heels of the pandemic, which obviously there was an enormous amount of physical separation, isolation. It also led to this work from home culture, which a lot of people love in certain ways, but it doesn't, I think we forgot about the amount of interaction and the connection, the real emotional friendships and interaction and support that we got from colleagues that we saw day to day. And I think particularly for men, because men and women do interact a little bit differently. Women can have phone calls and feel like they bridged a gap there. Men are less, and there's obviously exceptions to this, and it's not across the board, but men are more inclined to bond when they can stand shoulder to shoulder, they can do something, they can be in each other's physical company. That just makes more of a difference to men. And it's a very isolating place to be when you can't get that sense of connection and camaraderie through, media or through a phone or through text. It just doesn't exist. And so, I think the more people rely on interacting through posting or through sort of watching somebody else's life through social media, or just swiping left, swiping right, not swiping, talking to somebody over one of the apps for 3 weeks and then disappearing, right? The more we do that, the less we feel fulfilled, even though there are activities theoretically with other people. It's not the same as taking somebody in with all of your senses, right? Being able to reach out and touch them, being able to laugh and all those things. It's just not the same unless you're physically together.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called The Dopamine Detox. And one of the key words or key phrases that I heard in this was, in the digital age, we are confusing excitement with fulfillment. And because it feels exciting to be on these apps and be swiping on people, we think that we are going to be fulfilled. But it's like a little dopamine chase that continuously diminishes the more and more that we do it. And I mean, me and Dante are unique in this day and age because we both met our partners in the wild, which was not on social apps and stuff like that. And we talk about that all the time. But it's like, it's very interesting to kind of hear the current landscape of dating, right? When you're searching for a partner, especially for people who weren't born as a millennial or Gen Z. So what do you think about the current landscape of dating, especially when it's digital first, which is such a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very challenging, but it's also, I think that's why we've seen the demographic, age-wise in particular, that we work with grows so much, I think there's, to your point, it's exciting to, oh, this person's attractive, oh, this person looks interesting. And then you realize it just, it takes up a lot of time. There's very little true reward at the end of it, because 9 times out of 10, it doesn't go anywhere, or the person isn't who they purported to be, because they don't have to be. I mean, there are actually even services out there now that will not only write someone's profile, but they will interact as the person.
Oh my goodness.
Right? So you don't even know
Yeah.
who you're talking to anymore. And you could have great banter with somebody for a week and they disappear and you have no idea what happened. And it could be honestly nothing. They just next, right? So I think that there's a lot of fatigue around that now for people who are serious, right? I think there's always going to be the people who like it for what it is, right? It's just fun. They're not serious. It doesn't really matter, right? But when you have those people who are truly serious about finding somebody meaningful, they're ready, they're doing the work on themselves. And I say it that way because so many people say he or she has done the work. Keeps going, never stops, right? And so if there are people who are truly ready, they're going to find that experience very frustrating, and they're going to be more inclined to work with a company that's going to help them meet the type of person that they're looking for, to present them with opportunities, give them that opportunity. And then the person's, there's a lot of agency, right? With the client, they have to show up, they have to communicate with the team. The team's also there to support them, because it's still not linear, even though it's matchmaking, right? It doesn't mean that everybody we present to you, if you like them, they're just going to fall madly in love with you. So there's a lot of support and a lot of communication and a lot of coaching and guidance that goes into helping people find not only the person that they want, but the relationship that they want as well. And I think people now are more inclined to understand that level of agency. And that's what we're seeing a lot more of. And obviously emotional intelligence and personal growth, these are all buzzwords that are overused fantastically, but if they're used properly, they're highly relevant for something like this, right? You have to have people who actually have that level of emotional maturity and preparedness to be a partner, a true partner. That doesn't mean the person just slides in and looks good on your arm. Partnership is a two-way street.
Dante, do you wonder, what is the percentage of the work that these guys are doing when it comes to the initial connection, right? But then actually coaching people up on how to be a good partner long term, right?
That was literally my next question. I think this is, you're spot on, Keenan. One of the things I'm kind of reminded of as you're speaking, Jen, is we have so much of current mainstream culture that ties into expectations of relationships. Amazon Prime is a great example. Anytime I'm trying to get a package shipped from a different company, I want it today or I want it tomorrow. It's just an expectation. Yeah. And I think with these social apps that we have nowadays, it sets up this false expectation that I'm going to get results really quick. So I'm kind of curious how that expectation bleeds into some of the work that you're doing and how you have to reframe some of these concepts with the clients that you work with.
Yeah, that's one of the first conversations that we have with people. And this is not a sign up, submit your credit card type of thing. We spend a lot of time getting to know people before we even present the notion of partnership. We want to make sure this is our first match. Are we the right company for you? And are you the right client for us? That's a very important aspect of it. And so part of that conversation is, if this person was literally on every street corner, you wouldn't need us. There's something about this person that is unique enough, that's nuanced enough, that it's going to take time. And we're getting to know you through this process. So we know what you've shared with us, but now we're going to test it.
Is it also fair to assume, Jen, that sometimes what people are looking for actually is not the right match for them? Because if you've gone through the same profile or avatar of a potential partner and it ends terribly every time, maybe that same type of person isn't what we're looking for here. So do you guys have to reframe that too? Yes,
we talk about patterns a lot. We go through past relationships. What happened? What didn't happen? Where did the partnership fall short? where did you fall short? Could you have done something different? Right? And how people react and respond to those challenging questions tells you a lot about how they're going to show up in this process.
Yeah.
But yeah, we want people to understand that this is not throwing a dart. We're not gonna come out of the gate and say, here's your person. That's not how this works. This is very much of a collaborative effort. We want your feedback. We're gonna stay within what we understand that you want, as long as we get to a point where you can articulate to us why her earlobes are important, right? I mean, there's got to come up, right? And so if somebody says something that really strikes us as not necessarily directive in a relationship, we're going to dig in. Why is that so important? Well, such and such happened in the past. Okay. So it's really not. It's this association with something that happened in the past. It's just not that is really where we are, right? So we have all of those conversations with people, and it's not unheard of for us to be midway through somebody's journey with us, and we see them pulling back into those patterns, right? They started out, they're more open, and then they're slowly sort of inching back into this pattern that wasn't productive for them. And if that's the case and we can't talk through it, we'll literally tell them, okay, let's take a break on the matching and let's do some coaching, and just coaching for a little while. And let's try to work through this and get to the bottom of it and figure out how we can get to a place that's a little bit more constructive.
Do you have big, like, transformative moments where, you have to say, like, we need basically an intervention because the ship is going the wrong way? Is that something that you guys do as well?
Yes. We have done it. And that's, again, that goes to, you can't be afraid to say anything as long as it's coming from the right place. You have to be able to ask the hardest questions, because that's how we're going to get to our mutual goal, is to ask those hard questions when things start to go sideways. And if you talk to anybody who deals with relationships, emotions, matter of the heart, love, if they tell you it never goes sideways, they're not telling you the truth. I mean, it does. This is, people are emotionally tied to things, right? And so there are times when you just have to say, okay, what is happening here? And have that difficult conversation. But again, you come to it from a constructive place, and we have the same goal. We're seeing a shift here that's, in our estimation, not productive to get to that goal. So let's talk through it. And if there's a level of refinement that we can do that makes sense, yeah, of course. And that people aren't locked into the very first thing that they said to us, because again, this is a process where people learn a lot about themselves, and we will push people out of their comfort zone sometimes, where they'll, have this checklist that starts to grow, and we'll sort of say, well, okay, this is where maybe this doesn't line up exactly, but we know this person, and here's why we think it would be an interesting connection. Maybe you both love the same, love to read the same type of thing, or you have very similar senses of humor, whatever the case might be. And we'll push people a little bit out of their comfort zone. And it's not often that backfires on us. It works out, not necessarily like they fall in love and run away together, but they come back and you're like, I'm really glad you did that. That was a really interesting evening. I don't think it's my person, but I really enjoyed meeting. Right? That's generally what we get from pushing people out of their comfort zone. And once you have to do that once, people are much more receptive to doing it again.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm gonna take this conversation in an interesting perspective.
Oh,
so this is part one, Jen. So we talked about the relationship with your parents and how they raised you guys as kids. Are they still together to this day?
They are.
Okay, so that is rare, right? Especially in my generation of growing up. My parents are together still. Not saying they haven't been through their ups and downs, but they still have demonstrated what sustainability over a long time horizon looks like, and the challenges that come along with building a family and a relationship. I wonder how much we are going to, in the future, have to combat the fact that the family nucleus in America is not as solid as it once was. Me and Dante both come from African American lineage, right? And a huge part of our culture is often dad isn't there. So we don't have a male figure that teaches us really how to be in a relationship through a sustainable period of time.
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of think about the American family nucleus, the perception of family, and how it's going to impact the generations in the future? A great example is my girlfriend came from a family upbringing that was a little bit rocky. And so her parents were never together, officially never married. And so that changes the worldview and how she looks at sustainability of long relationships. And when we first got together, it was a really big challenge because I came from a place of this is how things look long term. And she said, I've never experienced that. And we've had to meet each other in the middle and I would say negotiate what our values look like to be together because we do have that connection. But I realize everybody also doesn't come from the same experience as you and I.
No, not at all. And that's where, experience and values and goals are different. Right. So there are definitely people who have come from a less idyllic type of background, but they may have known somebody, their friend, their neighbor, where they saw it. And in their mind's eye, they said, that's what I want. And not to say, again, that it needs to be perfect. My parents have been together for 57 years. It's not a fairy tale. Right? Nothing is. And I think that's something that people need to understand. But every relationship involves an enormous amount of compromise. I don't care if you came from the same background. You didn't come from the same family and you're not the same person. Mm-hmm. So there's always going to be a level of compromise. But at the end of the day, if somebody, irrespective of that background, can identify as a goal wanting something different for their life or for their children's lives, that's a great place to start. And yeah, there are a lot more people who've experienced more of a tumultuous relationship with the parent figures or even siblings or whatever, but it's identifying in that person ultimately aligned values and goals for doing it differently, right? And how they processed and how they dealt with their experience. Do they just, set it aside as this is what it is? Or they say, I watched this and I watched that, my dad didn't, he didn't show up for my mom, right? He took her for granted. That's not something that I want in a partnership. Or, the father says, she was off doing whatever she wanted to do. She just wasn't part of the family unit. I was going to work every day and she didn't want to do her part or whatever it is. And so they do, somebody who is able to identify maybe where the shortcomings were and just identifying them is a huge part of it, right? We don't have to fix everything at once, but being able to identify the challenges that we saw in growing up and be open and malleable and growth oriented enough to want to make those changes when you meet the right person.
I mean, Dante is a definition of that. One thing I've always loved about this kid is he is so willing to do the inner work, right? He's had so many experiences where he's come face to face with some of the things that have been clouds in his life, and he's done the processes, gone through the time of what was necessary to do that work internally. And so, Dante, I'm not sure if you want to kind of talk a little bit. I want to put you on blast, but it's like I've always admired your ability to like focus on the things of what you don't want to carry forward into the relationships. Like he said, if we get started here, he just had his second child. His son is in the world. His daughter's about to turn 4 years old in 2 days. And so it's like he is a huge instrumental piece of like how these future individuals look at relationships. And he's done so much work to kind of, tackle some of the challenges that he's been through.
I started therapy for myself in 2017 and I committed to the journey. And in the beginning, it was a lot more frequent because I felt like I needed it. I was very stubborn, hard-headed, and I had a lot of bad habits. And one of the conversations I had with Keenan that was really profound is sometimes it takes such a long time for change to happen within generations. I know my father's father, so my grandfather, struggled with alcoholism. And my father was born. He said, "Hey, I don't want my kids to experience what I had to go through." Mm-hmm. And so he stopped. He struggled for a little bit and then stopped drinking. And so he had some of the challenges in his life. And as I look at my father, some of the things that he wanted to impart in me was, he wanted me to be more confident. He wanted me to feel really connected to him because he didn't feel like he had that with his father. And so I look at it as a passing of the baton. Like every time you get the baton, what you hope for is that you can do so much work on yourself to make it a lot easier for the generation that's going to come after you. And you can hand that baton off with some grace and ease. And so, yeah, I think doing the inner work is critical, and I don't think enough people with my complexion of skin talk about it enough. Keenan talked a little bit about some of the cultural constraints that sometimes happen. Is it's a bit taboo to talk about mental health. It's a bit taboo to talk about different topics in different circles, and so that's one of the motivating factors in having some of these conversations that Keenan and I have.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring that up, Jen, because we had our previous episode. We had an amazing guy on the podcast who was talking about the importance of relationships, and he was looking at these relationships through the lens of business. But he said, if I can teach people to have better relationships with themselves first, they can then be a better business partner, which means they can show up better at home, which means then we affect the local community. And if we can bring families back together, our community will transform. And so I almost think about you guys as like a first principle of like the domino that is tackling the relationship, bringing true human connection that then in generations has the ability to transform how we look at these things, because it's so challenging for so many people today.
Yeah. And I think the concept of relationship and the benefit of doing the inner work to understand how to show up better. You can't show up for somebody else well unless you've done enough work on yourself to show up for yourself. It's impossible to do. And I think that every relationship benefits from that. And that's something that we've seen a lot over the decades of work that we've done. Is obviously our focus is romantic relationships, but we've seen people go into business together. We've seen people forge incredible friendships. We actually had a former client call us the other day who said that she was she'd become friends with somebody we matched her with, and her best friend just married that person. So the relationships that we build, we see the sort of the fingers or the tendrils of these relationships go so far beyond that specific match. And I think that people find that their overall relationships benefit, the lens that they have to the world when they actually sit back and go through a process where somebody helps them to be more vulnerable and to be a little bit playful and to be less rigid in expectations, and understand that relationships are there's a no way, there's a must have, and the rest of it's all the land of compromise. Like, that's what a relationship is. Any type of relationship, business, friendship, romantic, there's a huge amount of compromise that goes into it, and it's achieving the balance of still being able to have your voice, establish boundaries, articulate what you need, but meet that for your partner as well.
One of the things I keep thinking about as you're talking, Jen, is the need for a lot of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, like, how do you navigate, trying to be a matchmaker with someone who might not be as aware to what their values are or what they want, but they do have the desire to find a partner?
Cautiously. But it's true. In an ideal world, we identify that before we engage with the person. In an ideal world, we're not perfect. It happens, right? And that's where those hard conversations come in, and that's where the coaching piece comes in, and just asking people, it's never you do X, right? How you present the information, how you present the challenge goes a long way to getting the result that you want. If you approach it as questions, and what if we looked at it this way? What do you see in that scenario? And giving them the opportunity to rise to it, as opposed to telling them they're doing something wrong. Because generally, if somebody isn't super self-aware, they don't take you're doing it wrong very well, right? So you have to find a way to sort of reorient them to look at the same issue. And most of the time it works. It doesn't always work, right? It just doesn't. There are certain people who just have a big blind spot for how they show up in the world. But again, that's hopefully something that we can suss out before we engage. But it's giving people the opportunity to look at things from a different view when it's presented in a way that's not from their first person view.
I want to kind of spin back to, just the current landscape of what dating looks like. I was listening to a podcast that was really interesting to me the other day. And so many people talk about personal brand today, right? And like everybody is their own personal brand. It's how you represent yourself. It's your aesthetic, yada, yada. And the comparison was made on the podcast that, in today's lens of social media and how we even present our partners for the first time, we see a lot of people taking the approach of soft launching their relationship. What does that mean? They'll put up posts and they'll have like a hand on their leg and be like, I'm here with somebody special, right? And what that contradiction was interesting to me, because it was like, are we actually individual brands collaborating for more visibility in the world today? Or are we completely missing the emphasis of what a true relationship looks like? So what do you kind of think about that personal brand, soft launching, collaboration kind of idea?
I think I look, there is a segment of the population that is very visible that takes that approach. Is it the most genuine? Is it the most constructive? Does it genuinely feel good? Probably not, right? And you have to look at what is the motivation behind that relationship. If there is a collaboration taking place, what is the real benefit? Is there some sort of marketing or social benefit, or is the benefit here and here, right? Where is it really? And most of the people that we're working with, they're not really interested in social media, let alone presenting or discussing or sharing this type of relationship on social media. But not everybody. I think there are some genuine relationships out there. But also, if you think about the way that the public reacts to this kind of thing, there's probably a level of protectionism too, versus just throwing this person into light with them, sort of gauging response. I mean, there could be a level of protectiveness that's going on there as well. It's going to depend on the situation. But, I think when you find people that you love, there are ways of sort of introducing the person into your life, if that's what you want to do, without it being sort of a opening night type of approach to things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, so you mentioned something there that, the normal demographic of people who we're engaging with aren't really interested in that kind of like soft launch, social media type of awareness. In our early discussions with your team, they brought up something that was really interesting to me, that like there is a portion of younger demo, right? Early 20s who are also interested in the matchmaking services. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was surprising for me when we had our first discussion together.
Yeah. So there are a couple of reasons. First of all, they find themselves inundated online. It's super frustrating. Most of them are busy, right? And sometimes it's influencers, sometimes it's people who've just had an early exit. They developed a gaming situation or whatever they did, and all of a sudden they find themselves in this situation where it's more difficult to meet people and know whether it's genuine or not, right? The level of visibility they found themselves in situations where whoever was pursuing them or making themselves available wasn't who they really thought they were, or the motivation was different. So, and they tend to be more private about this aspect of their life. They could be very public about a lot of other things, but it takes a minute for them to share something this deep. And so that's a group of people that we've started to serve more and more. We see them more and more these days. I think 5-7 years ago, it would have been more accurate to say most of our clients were mid 40s and up. And now, as I think I shared with you, we have clients who are 20, we have clients who are in their mid 80s, right? Wow. Everybody wants to find a partner. And at a certain point in time, you don't find yourself surrounded by the right opportunities. And so where do you find them? There's also, they don't necessarily want to be seen on the app. Some people don't care, but some people, they're just more private. They have something to lose, right? And they're a little bit nervous about all the information that they've heard about the situations that happen online. And so they'd rather do it in a more purposeful, somewhat protected way.
Yeah, me and Dante, after our first discussion together with your team, were like, if we were to be single for some reason in this world, we are 1000% going to Jen and the team because we have just like our time and our energy is limited, but we have resources that we can allocate towards finding somebody who's an appropriate partner. And very transparently, not having been out in the dating sphere for the last 7-8 years, I'm not interested in trying to go hand-to-hand combat, swiping left and right with people on Tinder and everything else like that, if that's even real anymore. But it's a real process. I mean, it's something that we both talked about. So it's like
super inefficient. I mean, there are definitely people who have success online. There absolutely are. But the vast majority of people have a lot of frustration before they find success. So it's what is your threshold for that level of frustration if you're going to engage in it, you know?
I'm curious, working with such a broad swath of clients, youngest being 20, up into the 80s, maybe plus. What are some of the things that you found are different between the generations that you've identified? Like how do they approach dating differently?
Well, so interestingly, we've had some younger clients who initially thought that they could sort of date in a group. Right? Bring other people to the date.
Bachelor version. Yeah.
And
like friends or like.
Yeah, friends. Sometimes, they have a handler, so to speak, an assistant or something, and that person will come and they find that, maybe they're not connecting with the people they're meeting quite as much as, well, there's a third party at the table. It makes it a little bit more challenging, but that comes from a place of being uncomfortable, being vulnerable. Right. And a little bit of fear, frankly, for being exposed. Nobody's there to sort of act as the buffer. Right. And so getting people to the point of being confident in that. And then so they tend to be, they're not necessarily on the cusp of wanting to have children and wanting to get married, but they want to be with the right person. They don't want to spend time with somebody who is ultimately not going to be a good person for them, right? Somebody who's going to support them and allow them to be who they truly are and not necessarily this persona that they've presented to the world. That's where a lot of that comes from, is they establish this personal brand, but that's not actually who they are day to day. They don't pop out of bed in the morning as this person. So they want somebody who's going to embrace that. And then as people age, it's a very lonely place, and it sounds really morbid, but they live in the land of losing a lot of people around them all the time, right? As you get into your mid 70s and onward, you're losing siblings, you're losing friends, right? And to have a partner and to be able to spend time and give your heart to somebody in those years when you have the time and you have the bandwidth to really do things together and spend time, and there's no, I've got to get to work, or this project's really weighing on me. You actually have the freedom mentally and emotionally to show up and be with somebody in a different way.
So Jen, one of the traditions we have here on the podcast is our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question.
Oh dear. Okay.
So this is going to be, I want to put a little bit of context around this. This is somewhat angled towards leadership, right? And self-awareness, which we've talked a lot about here today on the podcast. Mm-hmm. So do you know what it's truly like to sit across the table from you as a leader? And have you actually looked in that mirror?
I have tried, to be honest with you. I know that, I'm not sure if this is really the question, but I know that I have a very strong personality, and I come across as very confident in what I think and what I feel about things. And one of the things that I work on now is trying not to be as statement driven and to be more question driven, because I come from the land of, let me tell you how it is, right? I mean, I'm a woman. I've had to, sort of work a little extra to get to where I am. And I was on Wall Street, and you had to sort of have that little edge to you. And in this role, and in most leadership roles, being vulnerable, acknowledging fallibility, right? Being human and understanding and interested in learning from other people, because everybody's got something to teach me. I know that, right? And I know it more now than I ever have. So my hope is that for those who've sat across the table from me previously and thought I was a little hard, that now people sit across from me and walk away and say, she's softer than I thought she would be.
Well, Jen, for everybody who tuned in, watched, and listened today, I know we learned so much about what the current landscape of relationship and matchmaking and just building, that connection that is so very important for us all today. And we just can't thank you enough for being here. Yeah. Seriously.
It was my pleasure. It was super fun.
All right, guys, that's the pod. We'll catch you in the next one.